Here's an original concept. Well, at least for the next few days. The Dana 60, Mopar's middle finger to Ford's 9-inch dynasty. While Ford guys were bragging about their dropout third members and easy gear swaps, Mopar was building something that could handle a Hemi trying to rip itself apart at 7,000 RPM. This is the story of how Chrysler said, "We don't need your 9-inch," and backed it up with 1.5-inch axle shafts in pure spite. Let's set the stage. Late 1950s, early 60s. Ford drops the 9-inch rear end, and it's an absolute game changer. That dropout center section, genius. You could swap gear ratios without pulling the entire axle. Drag racers lost their minds. You could have multiple center sections pre-built, different ratios, just bolt them in between rounds. The 9-inch became the axle. Didn't matter if you had a Chevy, a Mopar, even a hot rod with a flathead. Serious guys were swapping in Ford 9 inches. It was that good. But here's the thing about dominance. It pisses off the competition. Chrysler's muscle car game was heating up. 426 Hemi, 446 pack. These weren't garage builds, these were factory monsters. And they wanted something even tougher. The 8.75-inch Sure Grip was solid, legitimately good for most applications, even big block cars. But for their most extreme combinations, Hemis and 446 packs with 4 speeds getting clutch dumped by lead-footed maniacs, Chrysler wanted overkill. They wanted bulletproof. And Mopar guys were getting tired of hearing, "Just swap in a Ford 9-inch." That's not how brand loyalty works. You don't build a Hemi Cuda to throw Ford parts under it. Chrysler needed an answer, and they found it with Dana. So what makes an axle better anyway? Spoiler alert, it's not just about being thick. There's actually engineering behind this, and Mopar was about to school everyone. Dana Corporation, also known as Spicer, had been building heavy-duty axles for trucks since the early 1900s. They knew how to build stuff that wouldn't explode under abuse. The Dana 60 shows up in 1960s-era heavy-duty trucks first, 3/4-ton, 1-ton applications. Work truck duty, not sexy but bulletproof. Chrysler's engineers looked at this thing and saw potential, not as a truck axle, as a weapon. Here's what they were working with. The Dana 60 had 1.5-inch diameter axle shafts. The Ford 9-inch, 1.31 inches. Doesn't sound like much, but that's significantly more shaft to twist before it says goodbye. The ring gear on the Dana 60 measured 9.75 inches in diameter, actually larger than the Ford 9-inch's 9-inch ring gear. And the pinion was bigger too. That pinion size matters because it's the first thing taking all that engine torque. Bigger pinion, better distribution of load across the gear teeth, less chance of grenading on a hard launch. The years that mattered, 1969 to 1974. This is when Dana 60s started showing up under serious Mopar muscle. 1970 to 71, Hemi Cudas and Challengers, Superbirds and Daytonas, heavy spec Roadrunners, some A-body stuff when someone optioned the absolute hell out of it. If you were ordering a Hemi car or a track pack, you were getting a Dana 60. Chrysler wasn't messing around. And here's what made it different from the 9-inch beyond just specs. The Dana 60 wasn't trying to be a Ford 9-inch. It had its own design philosophy. Instead of the dropout center, you had a traditional removable carrier. Yeah, that meant more work to swap gears, but it also meant a stronger housing. Less flex under load. The axle tubes were thicker. The welds were beefier. This thing was built like it expected to be abused, because under a Hemi, it absolutely would be. Mopar didn't need the easiest axle to work on. They needed the axle that wouldn't disintegrate when a guy with a 4-speed and no mechanical sympathy decided to test the quarter mile. But being strong doesn't mean you're better. Ford guys weren't about to hand over the crown just because Mopar showed up with bigger shafts. So let's actually compare these things head to head. Dana 60 versus Ford 9-inch. Let's get into it. Round 1, raw strength. Dana 60 takes this one. Those 1.5-inch axle shafts compared to the Ford's 1.31-inch shafts, bigger ring gear at 9.75 inches versus 9 inches, larger pinion, thicker housing. It's legitimately stronger in the areas that matter for street and strip use. The Ford 9-inch's advantage is its larger hypoid offset, which increases gear tooth strength, But overall, the Dana 60 has more mass where it counts. If you're building a high-horsepower street car that's going to see repeated abuse, the Dana 60 has more meat. Ford 9-inch is no slouch, but it was designed in an era when 400 horsepower was insane. The Dana 60 came from the truck world where durability wasn't optional. Round 2, ease of service. Ford 9-inch destroys the Dana 60 here. That dropout center section is legendary for a reason. Unbolt it, swap it, bolt in a new one. You can change gear ratios in an hour if you know what you're doing. And the Dana 60, you're pulling axle shafts, removing the carrier, setting up new gears, checking pinion depth, backlash, preload. It's a full day if you're doing it right. For drag racing, where you might run different ratios depending on the track, Ford wins by a mile. Round 3, aftermarket support. This isn't even close. Ford 9-inch has decades of aftermarket dominance. Every ratio you can imagine. Lockers, spools, limited slips, strange custom setups. It's all available. Dana 60 has solid aftermarket support. Don't get me wrong. Strange, Yukon, Moser, Curry, they all make great Dana 60 stuff, but it's not the same universe of options as the 9-inch. Round 4, weight. Ford 9-inch is generally lighter. Depends on the specific housings you're comparing, but the Dana 60's thicker tubes and beefier construction add pounds. For a drag car where every pound matters, Ford has the edge. Round 5, gear tooth contact and load distribution. Here's where it gets interesting. The Dana 60's bigger pinion gives it better tooth contact under load. The gear mesh is more stable under hard acceleration. The Ford 9-inch's smaller pinion can be more prone to deflection under extreme load, though in most applications this isn't an issue. For sustained high-load situations, think road racing or a street car that gets driven hard regularly, Dana 60 has a slight advantage. Round 6, cost. Used depends on what you find. Both are pricey if you want a good one. New aftermarket, the Ford 9-inch has more budget options because of the competition in that space. Dana 60s tend to run a bit more expensive for comparable quality. So who wins? This all depends what you're building. If you're building a pure drag car, want the easiest service life, and need maximum aftermarket flexibility, Ford 9-inch is still king. If you're building a high-horsepower street car, want maximum durability, and you're okay with more involved service, Dana 60 is your move. But here's the real truth. The Dana 60 didn't need to beat the Ford 9-inch. It just needed to prove Mopar guys didn't have to settle for Ford parts, and it absolutely did that. So where does that leave us today? Because this isn't just vintage iron we're talking about. People are still building with these things in 2025. Walk into any muscle car show, any drag strip, any pro touring build thread, and you'll still see this debate. The Ford 9-inch is still the drag racing standard. You'll see them under everything from 32 Fords to modern pro mods. That ease of service and massive aftermarket means it's not going anywhere. But the Dana 60, it's got its own cult following. Modern aftermarket Dana 60s are serious. Strange S60, Moser, Curry. These aren't your grandpa's truck axles. We're talking forged axle shafts rated to 1,500 plus horsepower. Modern gear metallurgy, nodular iron cases, full floating setups for maximum strength. And here's what's interesting. A lot of serious Mopar Pro Touring builds still run Dana 60s. Not because they have to, because they want to. There's something about keeping it Mopar. The Dana 60 is part of the heritage. You don't build a numbers-matching Hemi car and then throw a Ford rear end under it. That's sacrilege. But even beyond brand loyalty, the Dana 60 earned respect. It showed up in some of the most legendary Mopars ever built. It survived decades of abuse. It proved that the Ford 9-inch wasn't the only answer. Modern builders have options now, partly because the Dana 60 forced the conversation. It proved that different design philosophies could work, that there wasn't just one right way to build a rear end. And in the truck world, the Dana 60 is still the heavy-duty standard. You'll find Dana 60s under 3/4 ton and 1-ton trucks from multiple manufacturers. It's been adapted, updated, refined, but the core design is still there. That's 60-plus years of relevance. Not many components can claim that. The verdict? The Dana 60 is Mopar's proof that you don't have to follow Ford's playbook to build something legendary. Is it objectively better than the Ford 9-inch? In some ways, yes. In other ways, no. But it didn't need to be better. It needed to be different and good enough to give Mopar guys their own identity. And on that measure, it absolutely succeeded. Here's what I respect most about the Dana 60 story. Chrysler could have just licensed Ford's design. They could have built a 9-inch clone and called it a day. Nobody would have blamed them. It was the proven winner. Instead, they said, we're going to do our own thing, and partnered with a company that knew how to build bomb-proof hardware. The result was an axle that could handle a Hemi and a Superbird doing 200 miles per hour at Talladega. An axle that's still being built and upgraded today. An axle that gave Mopar its own identity in the muscle car wars. So is the Dana 60 the king of all muscle car rear ends? Unfortunately, this is a no. That's still the Ford 9-inch in most applications. But is it a legend in its own right? Absolutely. The Dana 60 proved that sometimes the best answer isn't to copy the leader. Sometimes the best answer is to build something that fits your needs, your philosophy, your cars. And for Mopar guys who wanted to keep it all Mopar, the Dana 60 was, and still is, the answer. Strong, proven, unmistakably Mopar. That's the Dana 60. And there you have it, the Dana 60, Mopar's answer to Ford's 9-inch dominance. You heard it here first, until you see the same thumbnail and title pop up elsewhere. If you learned something, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment on what you're running, 9-inch or Dana 60. Let's argue about it. See you in the next one.